Tonight we descend into the most dangerous territory of all, the place where your exhaustion meets your identity, where your worth has become so tangled with your output that you've forgotten who you are when you're not producing something. This is the shadow realm of the modern psyche, where the hardest workers carry the heaviest burdens, not because the world demands it, but because something deeper, something unconscious has convinced them they don't deserve peace without performance. You know that feeling when you finally sit down after a 16-hour day, and instead of relief there's just emptiness? That hollow sensation where rest should be, that's not laziness knocking at your door. That's your soul asking why you've been running from it for so long. Tonight, we explore why the people who work themselves to the bone often find themselves spiritually bankrupt, emotionally depleted, and somehow still convinced they haven't done enough. The cruel irony of our time is that those who sacrifice the most often receive the least. Not because the universe is unfair, but because they've unconsciously programmed themselves to believe that struggle equals worth. They've made suffering their currency and wonder why abundance feels foreign in their hands. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. The insomniacs, the overthinkers, the emotionally exhausted who find solace in the darkness of deep reflection. Dim the lights if you haven't already. Lower the volume to that sweet spot where my voice becomes a whisper in your mind rather than sound in your ears. Make sure your phone is on silent. This journey requires your full presence, not the fragmented attention you've been giving everything else in your life. You're no longer in your bedroom. You're inside the psyche of someone who has confused motion with progress, effort with effectiveness, and exhaustion with virtue. Tonight we're not just talking about work, we're excavating the unconscious beliefs that have turned your life into a hamster wheel of perpetual striving. The good news, your shadow has been waiting patiently to show you where you've been bleeding energy. The challenging news: it's going to require you to question everything you thought you knew about worthiness, effort, and what it truly means to be valuable in this world. There's a violence in the way we've been taught to relate to our own value. A brutal arithmetic that says we must suffer to be worthy, must bleed to be blessed, must exhaust ourselves to earn the right to exist peacefully in our own skin. This isn't just a work ethic, it's a spiritual sickness, a deep fracture in the psyche that transforms every moment of rest into guilt and every achievement into evidence that we haven't done enough. Carl Jung understood this shadow intimately. He saw how the collective unconscious carries the wounds of generations who believed that worth must be earned through pain, that love must be purchased through sacrifice, that peace must be justified through productivity. What Jung called the Protestant work ethic has metastasized into something far more insidious, a kind of existential masochism that makes relaxation feel like rebellion and joy feel like theft. You see this in the way people apologize for taking breaks as if rest were a crime against productivity. You see it in the way they justify their existence through their accomplishments, as if they were defendants in a cosmic court, where the jury is always hungry for more evidence of their worth. You see it in the hollow eyes of the successful, who've climbed every mountain they thought they were supposed to climb, only to find themselves standing alone at the summit, wondering why the view doesn't feel like victory. The shadow of effort is not effort itself. It's the unconscious belief that without constant motion, constant production, constant proof of our usefulness, we cease to deserve love, attention, or even basic respect. It's the internalized voice of a culture that has forgotten that being precedes doing that worth is inherent rather than earned, that the soul doesn't operate on a merit system. This shadow manifests in the way you check your email at midnight, not because anyone expects you to, but because some part of you believes that your value decreases with every moment you're not producing something. It shows up in the way you feel, guilty for enjoying a sunset without photographing it for social media, as if beauty only counts when it's been monetized or shared. It appears in the way you apologize for taking up space, speaking up in meetings, or asking for what you need, as if your very existence requires constant justification. The most tragic aspect of this shadow is how it corrupts genuine passion. When everything becomes about proving yourself, nothing remains about expressing yourself. The artist stops creating for the joy of creation and starts producing for the validation of production. The helper stops helping from love and starts helping from the compulsion to be needed. The worker stops working from purpose and starts working from the fear of worthlessness. Jung wrote about the danger of identifying too completely with our persona, the mask we wear for the world. But in our hyper-productive culture, the mask has become not just who we think we are, but who we think we must be to deserve existence. The persona of the busy person, the essential person, the irreplaceable person becomes a prison that we simultaneously inhabit and maintain. The shadow whispers that if you stop running, you'll discover you have nowhere to go. If you stop doing, you'll find out you have nothing to be. If you stop producing, you'll realize you have nothing to offer. These whispers are lies, but they're convincing, because they're wrapped in the language of virtue, responsibility, and strength. Breaking free from this prison requires recognizing that the guard has always been you. The cell door has never been locked. The sentence you're serving was never handed down by any judge, but the one in your own mind. The internalized voice of a world that profits from your exhaustion, that needs your emptiness, to sell you solutions that requires your insecurity to maintain its market for worth. The first step toward freedom is the most terrifying. You must sit still long enough to discover who you are when you're not doing anything for anyone. You must risk the possibility that your worth might not be tied to your productivity, that your value might not require constant reinforcement, that your existence might be justified by nothing more than the simple fact that you exist. This is not a call to laziness or irresponsibility. This is an invitation to discover what true strength looks like. The strength to be present without performing to contribute, without controlling to care, without sacrificing your soul on the altar of others' expectations. The exhaustion you carry isn't entirely your own. In your bones, in your blood, in the unconscious patterns that drive you to work, until your hands shake and your vision blurs, you carry the echoes of ancestors who had no choice but to survive through sheer force of will. Their trauma has become your template. Their survival strategies have become your default settings, and their fear of rest has become your inability to trust that you're safe when you're still. Jung called this the collective unconscious, the reservoir of experiences shared by all humanity, passed down not through teaching, but through the mysterious alchemy of genetic memory and cultural transmission. Your great-grandmother's fear of poverty didn't die with her. It lives in the way you hoard tasks like she hoarded bread. Your grandfather's shame about needing help didn't disappear. It manifests in your inability to delegate, to trust, to believe that others can carry some of the weight you've been carrying alone. This inherited exhaustion shows up in the strangest places. You find yourself cleaning the house at midnight, not because it's dirty, but because some ancestral voice whispers, "That idle hands are the devil's playground." You apologize for taking sick days, not because anyone has ever punished you for being human, but because generations of your lineage learned that weakness was a luxury they couldn't afford. You work through lunch skip vacations and answer emails on weekends, not because you love your job, but because somewhere in your cellular memory lives the terror of being seen as dispensable. The shadow of ancestral survival is particularly cruel because it disguises itself as virtue. It tells you that your exhaustion is nobility, that your self-sacrifice is love, that your inability to rest is strength. It convinces you that you're honoring your ancestors by never allowing yourself the peace they couldn't have, never claiming the security they couldn't access, never trusting the abundance they couldn't imagine. But here's the truth: your ancestors would want you to know they didn't survive so that you could spend your life in survival mode. They endured scarcity so that you could learn to trust abundance. They worked themselves to death so that you could discover what it means to truly live. The greatest honor you can pay to their struggle is to break the cycle, to heal the wound, to finally rest in the safety they created for you through their sacrifice. The healing begins with recognition. Every time you feel guilty for resting, ask yourself, whose voice is this? When you can't enjoy success without immediately looking for the next mountain to climb, pause and wonder, whose restlessness am I inheriting? When you find yourself apologizing for taking up space, needing attention, or asking for help, inquire gently, whose shame am I carrying? Your ancestors' survival strategies were perfect for their circumstances and completely inappropriate for yours. The hypervigilance that kept them alive in times of genuine danger now keeps you exhausted in times of relative safety. The scarcity mindset that helped them stretch resources during actual famine now prevents you from receiving the abundance that surrounds you. The self-reliance that was necessary when help was unavailable now isolates you in a world full of willing supporters. Breaking these inherited patterns requires immense compassion, not just for yourself, but for the ancestors whose unhealed trauma you're carrying. They didn't choose to pass their wounds to you, they simply didn't have the resources to heal them. You do. The therapy they couldn't afford, the safety they couldn't trust, the abundance they couldn't imagine. These are available to you now. The work is not to judge your ancestors for their limitations, but to thank them for their gifts and release them from the burden of your continued suffering. It's to say, I honor your struggle by choosing peace. I respect your sacrifice by learning to receive. I acknowledge your pain by healing what you couldn't heal in yourself. This healing is not just personal, it's generational. When you break the pattern of inherited exhaustion, you don't just free yourself. You free your children from carrying the weight you've been carrying, your grandchildren from the patterns you've been perpetuating, and perhaps even your ancestors from the spiritual burden of knowing their trauma continues to cause suffering in the world. The chain of inherited exhaustion ends with you, but only if you have the courage to set down the weight that was never yours to carry and trust that your worth was never dependent on how much you could endure. In the endless scroll of your to-do list, something sinister has taken root. An addiction so socially acceptable, so culturally celebrated, that you've never questioned whether the high you get from checking off tasks might be the very thing keeping you trapped in cycles of exhaustion and emptiness. Your brain has become a dopamine dealer, and productivity has become your drug of choice, leaving you constantly chasing the next fix, while the deeper longings of your soul remain unaddressed. The neuroscience of modern productivity culture is a masterclass in behavioral manipulation. Every notification, every completed task, every small accomplishment triggers a tiny release of dopamine, the same neurochemical involved in gambling, social media, and substance addictions. You've been conditioned to equate this fleeting chemical high with genuine satisfaction, mistaking the buzz of busyness for the deeper fulfillment that comes from meaningful engagement with life. This is why you can work 16 hours and still feel empty. This is why you can accomplish everything on your list and still feel like you haven't done enough. This is why rest feels like withdrawal, why sitting still without purpose feels like torture, why you reach for your phone the moment there's a lull in stimulation. You're not just tired, you're in the grip of a neurochemical dependency that has hijacked your natural capacity for contentment. The dopamine trap is particularly insidious because it wears the mask of virtue. Society celebrates your addiction, rewards your dependency, and calls your spiritual emptiness work ethic. You're praised for being busy, admired for being essential, respected for being always available. The very behavior that's slowly destroying your capacity for genuine joy is being reinforced by every performance review, every social media post about your hustle, every compliment about how dedicated you are. Jung understood that what we resist in consciousness often manifests as compulsion in behavior. The modern worker's resistance to meaninglessness has become a compulsive search for meaning through productivity. The fear of insignificance has become an addiction to busyness. The terror of not mattering has become a dependency on being needed. You're not just working, you're desperately trying to prove something to a jury that exists only in your own mind. The shadow of dopamine addiction manifests in subtle ways. You find yourself manufacturing urgency where none exists, creating crises to justify the adrenaline rush of solving them. You become irritable when forced to slow down, anxious when there's nothing immediate to do, and restless in the presence of peace. You mistake activity for progress, motion for purpose, and the quantity of your tasks for the quality of your life. This addiction is also self-perpetuating. The more you rely on external validation through productivity, the less you develop your capacity for internal satisfaction. Your ability to find joy in simple existence atrophies like an unused muscle. Your tolerance for boredom, for stillness, for the unproductive spaces where creativity and insight actually emerge, disappears entirely. The withdrawal from productivity addiction feels like death to the ego that has learned to define itself through output. Who are you when you're not busy? What's your value when you're not producing? How do you justify your existence when you're not solving problems, meeting deadlines, or being indispensable? These questions terrify the addicted mind because they threaten the entire structure of identity that has been built on external validation. But here's what the addiction prevents you from discovering. The deepest satisfaction doesn't come from doing more, but from being more present to what you're already doing. The highest productivity isn't measured in tasks completed, but in the quality of attention you bring to each moment. The greatest achievement isn't conquering your to-do list, but learning to find contentment independent of any external validation. Recovery from productivity addiction requires the same approach as recovery from any other dependency: recognition, withdrawal, and the patient cultivation of new patterns of satisfaction. You must learn to tolerate the discomfort of not being busy, to sit with the anxiety of not being needed, to trust that your worth exists independent of your output. This doesn't mean becoming lazy or irresponsible. It means learning to engage with work from a place of choice rather than compulsion, contribution rather than validation-seeking, service rather than addiction. It means discovering that the most productive people are often those who have learned to rest deeply, think clearly, and act from genuine inspiration rather than neurochemical dependency. The path out of the dopamine trap is the path toward what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, rather than who you think you need to be to earn approval. It's the journey from proving your worth to embodying it, from seeking validation to generating your own sense of meaning, from being driven by compulsion to being guided by wisdom. Somewhere along the way, you've convinced yourself that you're Atlas holding up the world on your shoulders, and that if you relax for even a moment, everything will collapse. This is perhaps the most seductive and destructive delusion of the modern worker. The belief that your constant availability, your endless effort, your willingness to sacrifice your well-being for the sake of others makes you not just valuable, but irreplaceable. The mythology of indispensability has become your identity, and it's slowly killing you. This myth begins innocently enough. You're good at what you do. People come to rely on you. You develop a reputation for being the one who can handle anything, who will never say no, who can be counted on when everyone else has reached their limit. The positive feedback feels good. It feeds that deep human need to matter, to be needed, to feel that your existence makes a difference in the world. But somewhere in the transformation from helpful to indispensable, something crucial gets lost: your humanity. You stop being a person who does good work and become a function that must always be performing. You stop being someone who contributes and become someone who must always be contributing. You stop being valuable for who you are and become valuable only for what you do. The mythology of indispensability is a prison that you build for yourself bar by bar, excuse by excuse. You tell yourself that no one else can do what you do quite as well, that the quality will suffer if you're not involved, that it's easier to do it yourself than to train someone else. These may be true in the short term, but they become the very chains that bind you to a life of exhaustion and emotional isolation. Jung wrote extensively about the danger of inflation, the psychological state where the conscious ego identifies with archetypal energies that properly belong to the collective unconscious. When you believe you're indispensable, you're inflating yourself with the archetype of the savior, the martyr, the one who must sacrifice themselves for the greater good. This inflation feels like strength, but it's actually a form of spiritual grandiosity that disconnects you from your genuine humanity. The shadow of indispensability manifests in the way you hoard responsibility, resist delegation, and secretly resent the very people you're trying to help. You become a bottleneck disguised as a solution, a helper who creates dependency rather than empowerment, a leader who weakens their team by refusing to trust them with meaningful responsibility. This mythology is particularly cruel because it prevents you from forming genuine relationships. When your value is tied to your function, You can never truly be known for who you are beneath the performance. People love what you do for them, not who you are when you're not doing anything. You become surrounded by others who need you, but don't truly see you, who depend on you, but don't genuinely know you. The fear beneath the mythology of indispensability is always the same. If you're not needed, you're not loved. If you can't solve everyone's problems, you have no value. If you're not constantly giving, you have nothing to offer. This fear is so deep and so painful that you'd rather exhaust yourself than face the possibility that you might be loved simply for existing. But here's the truth that the mythology obscures. True leadership creates other leaders. Real service empowers others to serve themselves. Genuine help teaches people to help themselves. When you hoard responsibility out of fear of being replaceable, you prevent others from growing into their own power, and you rob them of the satisfaction that comes from solving their own problems. The healing of indispensability requires a fundamental shift in identity. From being the one who does everything to being the one who helps others discover what they can do. It requires moving from a scarcity mindset that says there's not enough help to go around to an abundance mindset that trusts in others' capacity to step up when given the opportunity. This shift is terrifying because it requires you to face the possibility that the world won't collapse without you, that others are more capable than you've allowed them to be, and that your worth might be completely independent of your usefulness. It requires you to trust that you can be loved for who you are, not just for what you do. The mythology of indispensability ends when you realize that the most indispensable thing you can do is become dispensable, to develop others to trust, others to create systems that work without you. This isn't abandonment. It's the highest form of service. It's the difference between being a crutch that keeps people dependent and being a ladder that helps them climb to their own heights. When you release the need to be irreplaceable, you discover something far more valuable. The freedom to be genuinely helpful from a place of choice, rather than compulsion service, rather than ego love, rather than the desperate need to prove your worth through your utility to others. In the quiet moments between tasks, when the notifications stop pinging and the world briefly pauses its demands on your attention, there's a sound that only you can hear, the silent scream of a soul that has been systematically ignored, postponed and sacrificed on the altar of external achievement. This is the cry of the part of you that remembers what it felt like to dream without deadlines to create, without criteria to exist, without having to justify your existence through productivity. The overachieving soul is perhaps the most misunderstood casualty of modern life. From the outside, everything looks perfect. The resume is impressive, the bank account is healthy, the social media feed is a carefully curated showcase of success. But inside, there's a spiritual emptiness that no amount of external validation can fill, a longing that no achievement can satisfy, a restlessness that no promotion can calm. This is the shadow of success, the way that accomplishing everything you thought you wanted can leave you feeling more lost than ever. It's the peculiar suffering of those who have climbed the ladder, only to realize it was leaning against the wrong wall, who have won the race, only to discover they never wanted to run it in the first place, who have achieved their dreams, only to wake up and wonder whose dreams they were actually living. Carl Jung called this the midlife crisis, but it's not limited to middle age. It can happen at 30 when you realize that the career you've been building doesn't actually interest you. It can happen at 25 when you graduate with honors and feel nothing but emptiness. It can happen at any moment when the gap between your external success and your internal satisfaction becomes too wide to ignore. The overachieving soul screams silently because it has learned that its authentic desires are not acceptable, that its genuine needs are selfish, that its real dreams are impractical. It has been taught to value achievement over fulfillment, recognition over satisfaction, security over authenticity. It has been convinced that the path to happiness is through external validation, that the way to feel good about yourself is to do things that look good to others. This silencing happens gradually, almost imperceptibly. First, you postpone your authentic desires until you finish school. Then you postpone them until you establish your career. Then until you pay off your loans. Then until you buy a house. Then until you have children. Then until the children are grown. And suddenly you're 60 years old, successful by every external measure. and you can't remember what you actually wanted from life. The shadow of overachievement is not the achievements themselves, but the way they can become a substitute for authentic self-expression. When you're constantly focused on the next goal, the next milestone, the next level of success, you never have to face the more difficult questions. What do I actually enjoy? What brings me genuine satisfaction? What would I do if no one was watching? If there was no reward? If it served no purpose other than my own joy? This is why so many successful people report feeling like frauds, like they're living someone else's life, like they're performing a role rather than expressing their authentic self. The overachieving persona becomes so developed, so praised, so rewarded, that the person beneath it gets lost entirely. You become so good at being what others need you to be that you forget who you actually are when you're not trying to be anything for anyone. The silent scream is your soul's way of trying to remind you that success without authenticity is just elaborate failure, that achievement without satisfaction is just sophisticated suffering, that external validation without internal alignment is just a beautiful prison. Healing the overachieving soul requires the courage to disappoint others in service of your own authenticity. It requires the willingness to appear less impressive on paper so that you can feel more genuine in your heart. It requires the radical act of choosing what feels right over what looks good, what satisfies your soul over what impresses your peers. This healing doesn't necessarily mean abandoning your achievements or sabotaging your success. It means learning to achieve from authenticity rather than from the need to prove yourself. It means discovering what you actually want to create in the world rather than what you think you should create. It means finding the courage to disappoint the image others have of you, so that you can finally meet yourself as you truly are. The overachieving soul stops screaming when it realizes that the most impressive thing you can do is live authentically, that the greatest success is internal satisfaction, and that the highest achievement is becoming fully, unapologetically yourself. Even if that person is quieter, simpler, or less impressive than the one you've been trying to be. There's a particular kind of suffering that belongs to those who have been strong for so long that they've forgotten what it feels like to be held. It's the pain of the person who has become everyone else's rock, everyone else's solution, everyone else's source of stability, while their own foundation slowly crumbles beneath the weight of others' needs. This is the trauma of being strong. The way that your capacity to endure has become a prison, your ability to help has become a burden, and your strength has become the very thing that prevents you from receiving the care you desperately need. The trauma of being strong begins early, often in childhood, when circumstances force you to develop emotional resilience beyond your years. Maybe you had parents who were too overwhelmed to hold space for your needs. Maybe you had siblings who needed more attention than you did. Maybe you lived in an environment where showing vulnerability felt dangerous, where being strong was the only way to stay safe. You learned to swallow your pain so that others wouldn't have to deal with it. You learned to solve your own problems so that you wouldn't be a burden. You learned to be the helper, the fixer, the one who could handle anything, because being strong felt better than being needy, and being useful felt safer than being vulnerable. But what starts as a survival strategy becomes a life sentence. The muscle of strength, when overused, begins to atrophy the muscle of receiving. Your capacity to give grows enormous, while your ability to take in care, support, or even love diminishes to almost nothing. You become relationally disabled, unable to let others see your struggles, unable to ask for help, unable to believe that anyone would want to care for you if you weren't simultaneously caring for them. Carl Jung understood that our greatest strength often contains the seed of our greatest weakness. The person who develops exceptional strength often does so by disowning their need for support. They split off the vulnerable parts of themselves and project them onto others, becoming the helper who can't be helped, the giver who can't receive, the strong one who secretly feels completely alone. This trauma manifests in the way you apologize for having needs, the way you feel guilty for being tired, the way you push through pain that would sideline others, because you've learned that your worth is tied to your capacity to endure. It shows up in the way you attract people who need fixing, while repelling those who might actually be able to support you. It appears in the way you feel more comfortable giving than receiving, more at ease helping than being helped. The shadow of strength is the way it can become a barrier to intimacy. When you're always the strong one, you never experience the vulnerability. That creates genuine connection. Others may admire your strength, depend on your stability, and benefit from your support, but they can't truly know you because you've never shown them the parts of yourself that need tending. This creates a cruel irony. The stronger you become, the more isolated you feel. The more you help others, the more alone you become with your own struggles. The more indispensable you make yourself, the more you confirm your unconscious belief that you're only valuable when you're useful. The healing of this trauma requires the most terrifying act of courage imaginable for someone who has been strong for so long, the willingness to be weak in front of others. Not performed weakness, not strategic vulnerability, but genuine, uncontrolled, unproductive weakness. It requires the courage to cry without trying to comfort others, to ask for help without simultaneously offering it to be held without holding back. This healing is not about becoming weak or abandoning your genuine strength. It's about learning that true strength includes the ability to be vulnerable, that real power includes the capacity to receive that authentic leadership, includes the willingness to be led when necessary. The trauma of being strong is healed when you realize that your strength is not what makes you lovable. Your humanity is. Your ability to endure is not what makes you valuable. Your existence is. Your capacity to help others is not what makes you worthy of help. Your simple need for support is enough. When you finally allow yourself to be seen in your weakness, to be helped in your need, to be held in your pain, you discover something profound. The people who truly love you have been waiting for permission to care for you the way you've been caring for everyone else. Your strength kept them at a distance, not because they didn't want to help, but because you never gave them the chance. The strongest thing you can do is admit that you're not strong all the time. The most powerful thing you can do is let others see your powerlessness. The most helpful thing you can do is let others help you. This is not weakness. This is the integration of your shadow, the reclaiming of your wholeness, the healing of the split that turned your strength into your isolation. In the hidden marketplace of human relationships, there's a currency that's never been properly valued, rarely acknowledged, and almost always undercompensated: emotional labor. You've been spending this currency your entire life, often without realizing it, and the debt you've accumulated in the form of emotional exhaustion, resentment, and spiritual bankruptcy is finally coming due. Emotional labor is the work of managing feelings, both your own and others. It's the energy you spend reading the room, managing others' moods, anticipating needs, smoothing over conflicts, and maintaining the emotional equilibrium of every space you enter. It's the invisible work of being the thermostat rather than the thermometer, the one who regulates the emotional temperature of your environment rather than simply reflecting it. This labor is so deeply embedded in your daily life that you've forgotten its work at all. When you automatically de-escalate your partner's stress after a difficult day, that's emotional labor. When you remember everyone's birthdays, manage social calendars, and navigate family dynamics, that's emotional labor. When you bite your tongue to keep the peace smile, to make others comfortable, or suppress your own needs to attend to others, you're performing emotional labor that often goes completely unrecognized. The shadow of emotional labor is how it becomes expected, invisible, and taken for granted. The better you become at it, the more others depend on it without realizing they're depending on it. Your emotional labor becomes like the air conditioning in a building, only noticed when it stops working and essential to everyone's comfort, even though no one thinks about who's paying the electric bill. Carl Jung wrote about the importance of conscious relationship, but emotional labor often operates below the threshold of consciousness. Neither the person performing it nor the person benefiting from it fully recognizes the exchange taking place. This creates a kind of spiritual deficit spending, where you're constantly investing emotional energy without receiving adequate return, leading to the peculiar exhaustion of feeling drained even when nothing dramatic has happened. Women in particular have been socialized to perform emotional labor as a matter of course, but this burden extends beyond gender lines. Anyone who has learned to derive worth from maintaining others' emotional comfort becomes trapped in this invisible economy. You become the emotional janitor of your relationships, constantly cleaning up messes. You didn't make managing problems you didn't create and maintaining a stability that others take for granted. The trauma of uncompensated emotional labor manifests in the way you feel responsible for everyone's feelings but your own. You become hyper-attuned to others' moods while becoming disconnected from your own emotional needs. You develop an almost supernatural ability to sense when others are struggling, but you lose the ability to recognize when you're the one who needs support. This creates a relationship dynamic where you're simultaneously indispensable and invisible. Others need your emotional regulation, but they don't see it as a service you're providing. They benefit from your emotional intelligence, but they don't recognize it as labor that requires energy. They depend on your emotional availability, but they don't understand that availability as a finite resource that can be depleted. The economics of emotional labor becomes particularly distorted when your identity becomes tied to your capacity to provide it. You begin to measure your worth by your ability to make others feel better, to solve others' emotional problems, to be the source of comfort and stability in others' lives. Your emotional labor becomes not just what you do, but who you are. This leads to a cruel bind. The more emotional labor you provide, the more it's expected. The better you become at managing others' feelings, the more responsible you become for those feelings. The more you accommodate others' emotional needs, the more your own needs become secondary. You become trapped in a role that simultaneously makes you essential and invisible, needed and unappreciated. The healing begins with recognition, not just of the labor you're performing, but of the cost you're paying. Every time you manage someone else's emotions, you're using energy that could be used for your own emotional processing. Every time you take responsibility for someone else's feelings, you're avoiding responsibility for your own. Every time you prioritize someone else's comfort over your own authenticity, you're paying a price in personal integrity. Recovery from emotional labor addiction requires learning to distinguish between caring for others and managing their emotions for them. It means developing the capacity to be present with others' feelings without feeling responsible for fixing them. It means learning to offer support without sacrificing your own emotional well-being on the altar of others' comfort. The goal is not to stop caring or to become emotionally unavailable. The goal is to transform your emotional labor from an unconscious compulsion into a conscious choice, from an identity into a service you can choose to provide or not provide, based on your capacity and willingness. When you begin to value your emotional labor appropriately, others learn to value it too. When you stop providing it unconsciously, relationships become more balanced. When you stop managing others' emotions for them, they develop their own emotional regulation skills. The economy of emotional labor becomes fair when you stop accepting payment below market value for the invaluable service of emotional support. Burnout is not just tiredness that sleep can cure or stress that vacation can resolve. It's the systematic breakdown of your capacity to find meaning in effort, the gradual erosion of your ability to care, the slow-motion collapse of the internal structures that once gave your life coherence and purpose. Burnout is what happens when the architecture of your identity, built on productivity and external validation, finally buckles under the weight of its own contradictions. The architecture of burnout is constructed slowly, brick by brick, compromise by compromise. It begins with the seemingly reasonable decision to work a little harder, to push a little further, to sacrifice a little more in service of goals that always seem just within reach. You tell yourself it's temporary, that once you achieve this next milestone, once you solve this current crisis, once you prove yourself in this particular challenge, you'll be able to rest. But the architecture of burnout is designed to be self-perpetuating. Each achievement creates new expectations. Each problem solved reveals new problems. Each level of success demands a higher level of performance. You find yourself on a treadmill that speeds up automatically every time you get comfortable with the pace, until you're running just to stay in place, sprinting just to avoid falling behind. Carl Jung understood that what we don't process consciously manifests as symptoms in our lives. Burnout is the symptom of a soul that has been systematically ignored, a spirit that has been reduced to a productivity function, a human being who has been treated like a machine for so long that they've forgotten they're not actually mechanical. The architecture of burnout is built on several foundational lies. The first is that your worth is measurable through your output. The second is that rest is earned rather than essential. The third is that your value decreases when you're not producing something. These lies become the load-bearing walls of a life structure that's fundamentally unsustainable, designed to collapse under its own contradictions. The insidious nature of burnout is how it creeps in through the back door of virtue. You're not just working hard, you're being responsible. You're not just sacrificing your well-being, you're showing dedication. You're not just ignoring your needs, you're being selfless. The language of burnout is always the language of noble suffering, which makes it almost impossible to recognize until the damage is already done. The shadow of burnout manifests long before the dramatic collapse. It shows up in the way you stop, enjoying things you used to love, the way small tasks feel insurmountable, the way you become irritable about things that never bothered you before. It appears in the way you start needing more and more external stimulation to feel anything at all. Stronger coffee, louder music, more dramatic entertainment, because your natural capacity for pleasure has been numbed by chronic stress. Burnout creates a peculiar kind of depression that's not about sadness but about emptiness. You don't feel bad, you feel nothing. The emotional range that once included joy, excitement, curiosity, and passion narrows to a flat line of functional numbness. You can still perform, still produce, still meet obligations, but the meaning has drained out of everything, like color fading from a photograph. The architecture of burnout is also supported by a culture that mistakes exhaustion for dedication, that confuses busyness with importance, that celebrates the ability to function on no sleep, as if it were a superpower, rather than a symptom of profound imbalance. You receive praise for your ability to handle stress, admiration for your work ethic, and respect for your commitment, all while your soul slowly dies from neglect. Recovery from burnout requires more than rest, though rest is essential. It requires a complete reconstruction of the architecture of your life, a fundamental reimagining of what success means, what productivity serves, and what constitutes a life well lived. It requires the courage to disappoint others who have become accustomed to your unlimited availability, to set boundaries that feel selfish, but are actually essential to prioritize your humanity over your productivity. The rebuilding begins with the radical recognition that you are not a machine designed to optimize output. You are a human being with natural rhythms, genuine needs, and an inherent worth that exists completely independent of what you produce. Your value is not up for negotiation, not contingent on performance, not dependent on external validation. This reconstruction requires learning to listen to signals you've been ignoring for years. The signal of fatigue, that means you need rest. The signal of irritation, that means you need boundaries. The signal of emptiness, that means you need meaning. Beyond mere productivity, it requires developing what Jung called symbolic attitude, the ability to see your life as more than a series of tasks to complete, to recognize the deeper patterns and meanings that give existence its richness. The new architecture must be built on different foundations. The foundation of inherent worth rather than earned value, the foundation of sustainable rhythms rather than endless acceleration, the foundation of authentic expression rather than external validation. This is not a renovation of your current life structure. It's a complete rebuild from the ground up. When you rebuild your life on these healthier foundations, you discover something profound. Productivity that flows from well-being is infinitely more sustainable and ultimately more effective than productivity that flows from compulsion. Creativity that emerges from rest is more innovative than creativity squeezed out through force. Contribution that comes from overflow is more generous than contribution that comes from depletion. The architecture of a truly sustainable life is designed around human rhythms rather than mechanical ones, around natural cycles, rather than artificial deadlines, around the wisdom of the body and soul, rather than the demands of a culture that has forgotten what it means to be human. The conspiracy of comparison. In the age of curated lives and highlight reels, you've been unknowingly recruited into a psychological warfare campaign where your own mind has become the battlefield and comparison has become the weapon turned against your peace. This is not accidental. The conspiracy of comparison is a systematic dismantling of your ability to find satisfaction in your own journey, your own pace, your own definition of success. The conspiracy operates through the constant availability of others' achievements, others' progress, others' apparently effortless success. Your phone has become a portal into thousands of lives that appear more fulfilled, more successful, more effortlessly happy than your own. You scroll through images of others' vacations while you're working overtime, others' celebrations while you're struggling, others' breakthroughs while you're still figuring out the basics. But the conspiracy of comparison is deeper than social media. It's embedded in the very structure of how you've been taught to evaluate your life. From the moment you entered school, you were ranked, graded, and compared to others. Your worth was measured not by your own growth, but by how you performed, relative to your peers. This comparative mindset became so deeply ingrained that you lost the ability to evaluate your life on its own terms. Carl Jung warned about the danger of living according to collective values rather than individual ones. The conspiracy of comparison is the ultimate expression of this danger. It tricks you into measuring your inside against others' outsides, your struggles against others' highlight reels, your authentic complexity against others' carefully managed presentations. The shadow of comparison manifests in the way you can accomplish something significant and feel nothing but disappointment because someone else accomplished something more significant. It shows up in the way you can't enjoy your own success because you're too busy calculating how it measures against others' success. It appears in the way you minimize your own achievements and maximize your own struggles while doing the opposite for everyone else. This conspiracy is particularly cruel because it's based on fundamentally false information. You're comparing your complete experience, including all your fears, doubts, failures, and internal struggles, to others' edited presentations. You know all your own behind-the-scenes footage while seeing only others' final cuts. You're comparing your rough draft to others' published works, your practice sessions to others' performances. The comparison trap becomes most vicious when it comes to timing. You torture yourself for not being where others are at the same age, for not achieving milestones according to some imaginary timeline, for being behind in a race that exists only in your mind. You forget that everyone's journey is different, that everyone's challenges are unique, that everyone's definition of success should be personal rather than comparative. The conspiracy of comparison also operates through the assumption that there's a limited amount of success available in the world. If someone else is winning, you must be losing. If someone else is thriving, your own progress is somehow diminished. This scarcity mindset prevents you from celebrating others' successes because you unconsciously believe their gain is your loss. The healing begins with the recognition that comparison is a form of violence you're committing against yourself. Every time you measure your worth against someone else's achievements, you're abandoning yourself. Every time you feel diminished by someone else's success, you're betraying your own journey. Every time you wish you were someone else, you're rejecting the gift of your own unique existence. Breaking free from the conspiracy of comparison requires developing what Jung called individual ethics, a moral system based on your own values, your own definition of success, your own understanding of what constitutes a meaningful life. It requires the courage to define success for yourself, rather than accepting society's definition, to measure progress by your own growth rather than others' achievements. This liberation doesn't mean becoming indifferent to others or avoiding inspiration from their accomplishments. It means learning to appreciate others' success without diminishing your own, to be inspired by others' achievements without feeling inadequate, to celebrate others' progress without abandoning your own journey. The conspiracy of comparison loses its power when you realize that there is no universal timeline for human development, no standard path to fulfillment, no objective measure of a life well lived. Your journey is not comparable to anyone else's because it's uniquely yours. Your challenges are not the same as others because your soul came here to learn specific lessons. Your timing is not wrong because there is no right timing for anything. That matters. When you opt out of the conspiracy of comparison, you discover something liberating. Your life becomes infinitely more interesting when you stop trying to make it look like someone else's. Your achievements become more satisfying when you stop measuring them against others. Your journey becomes more meaningful when you stop wishing it was someone else's journey. The ultimate victory over the conspiracy of comparison is learning to be genuinely happy for others' success while remaining completely satisfied with your own progress. This is not resignation or low standards. It's the highest form of psychological freedom, the deepest expression of self-love, and the most radical act of rebellion against a culture that profits from your dissatisfaction with your own life. The sacred pause. In a world that has declared war on stillness, that treats silence as empty space to be filled rather than sacred space to be honored, there exists a revolutionary act so simple and so powerful that it threatens the entire structure of a culture built on constant motion. This act is the sacred pause, the deliberate choice to stop to breathe, to exist, without producing, to be present, without performing. The sacred pause is not laziness. It's not procrastination. It's not the collapse of someone who can no longer cope. It's the conscious decision to interrupt the automatic momentum of doing in order to reconnect with the deeper rhythms of being. It's the recognition that in a world obsessed with speed, the most radical thing you can do is slow down. In a culture addicted to noise, the most powerful thing you can do is embrace silence. Carl Jung understood that the psyche requires periods of incubation, times when the conscious mind steps back and allows the unconscious to process, integrate, and create. The sacred pause is not empty time. It's pregnant time, full of invisible activity that's essential to psychological health and creative breakthrough. It's in the pause that insights emerge, that solutions appear, that the soul catches up with the speed of modern life. The shadow of our action-obsessed culture is the way it has demonized rest, pathologized stillness, and made productivity the only acceptable form of existence. You've been conditioned to feel guilty when you're not doing something, anxious when you're not producing something, worthless when you're not contributing something. The sacred pause challenges this conditioning at its core. This pause is sacred because it's where you remember who you are beneath all the roles you play, all the tasks you perform, all the expectations you carry. In the space between stimulus and response, between demand and reaction, between pressure and productivity, there's a moment of pure potential where you can choose how to engage with life rather than simply reacting to it. The practice of the sacred pause begins with the recognition that your worth is not dependent on your motion. You don't lose value when you stop moving. You don't become less important when you stop producing. You don't disappear when you stop performing. In fact, it's often in the stopping that you become most visible to yourself, most available to others, most connected to what actually matters. The sacred pause can be as brief as a conscious breath between tasks, or as extended as a sabbatical from work. It can be the moment you take before responding to a difficult email, the walk you take without your phone, the evening you spend reading instead of working, the weekend you spend in nature instead of catching up on tasks. The duration is less important than the quality of presence you bring to the stopping. In the sacred pause, you discover that the world doesn't collapse when you're not holding it up. Others are more capable than you've allowed them to be. Problems solve themselves or reveal that they weren't actually problems. The urgency that drove you was often manufactured rather than real. The pace that exhausted you was chosen rather than imposed. The healing power of the sacred pause lies in its ability to interrupt the unconscious patterns that keep you trapped in cycles of exhaustion and emptiness. When you pause, you can observe your thoughts rather than being carried away by them. You can notice your emotions rather than being overwhelmed by them. You can choose your responses rather than reacting automatically. This pause also allows you to reconnect with the natural rhythms that modern life has trained you to ignore. Your energy has seasons, times of expansion and times of contraction, times of action and times of rest, times of giving and times of receiving. The sacred pause helps you attune to these natural cycles rather than forcing yourself to operate at constant peak capacity. The practice of pausing becomes sacred when you recognize it as a form of prayer, not necessarily to any deity, but to the deeper intelligence that governs life, to the wisdom that emerges in stillness, to the peace that exists beneath the surface chaos of modern existence. In the pause, you reconnect with the source of your energy rather than just spending it. The world needs your sacred pause as much as you do. When you model the courage to stop, to rest, to exist without justification, you give others permission to do the same. When you demonstrate that your worth is independent of your productivity, you challenge others to question their own compulsive busyness. When you choose presence over performance, you create space for more authentic connection. The sacred pause is not a retreat from life. It's a return to life. It's not an escape from responsibility. It's a return to the deepest responsibility you have, which is to remain connected to your own humanity while engaging with the world. It's not a luxury. It's a necessity for anyone who wants to contribute, sustainably rather than burn out spectacularly. In the sacred pause, you remember that you are not a human doing, but a human being. You recall that your existence has value independent of your achievements. You reconnect with the simple pleasure of being alive without having to earn that pleasure through constant effort. This remembering is not just healing for you, it's healing for a world that has forgotten what it means to simply be. The integration of shadow and light. The journey through the shadow of overwork, the trauma of being strong, the conspiracy of comparison, and the mythology of indispensability ultimately leads to the most important psychological work of all. The integration of these shadow aspects with the genuine light of your authentic self. This is not about eliminating your capacity for effort, your ability to help others, or your desire to achieve, but about bringing these qualities into conscious relationship with your deeper needs, values, and humanity. Carl Jung's concept of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are rather than who you think you should be, requires this integration of shadow and light. The shadow aspects we've explored are not enemies to be defeated, but parts of yourself that have become distorted through unconscious identification and cultural conditioning. They contain genuine gifts that have been corrupted by unconscious use. Your capacity for hard work, when integrated with wisdom about your limits and needs, becomes sustainable contribution rather than self-sacrifice. Your ability to help others, when balanced with appropriate boundaries and self-care, becomes genuine service rather than codependent enabling. Your desire to achieve, when grounded in authentic values rather than external validation, becomes meaningful creation rather than compulsive productivity. The integration process requires what Jung called holding the tension of opposites, the ability to embrace both your strength and your vulnerability, your capacity to give and your need to receive, your ability to act and your need to rest. This is not about finding a perfect balance, but about developing the wisdom to know when each aspect is appropriate and needed. This integration is reflected in the way you begin to make choices from wholeness rather than from the fragmented parts of yourself that have been driving your behavior. Instead of working from compulsion, you work from inspiration. Instead of helping from guilt, you help from genuine care. Instead of achieving from desperation, you achieve from creativity and contribution. The integrated person is not someone who has eliminated all struggle or challenge from their life, but someone who engages with life's difficulties from a place of groundedness rather than reactivity. They can work hard without losing themselves in the work. They can help others without abandoning themselves. They can strive for goals without their worth depending on achieving them. This integration also transforms your relationship with rest, with pleasure, with the simple enjoyment of existence. When you're no longer trying to earn your worth through effort, you can receive life's gifts without guilt. When you're no longer proving your value through sacrifice, you can care for yourself without shame. When you're no longer justifying your existence through productivity, you can simply enjoy being alive. The light that emerges from this integration is not the artificial brightness of forced positivity or denial of difficulty, but the steady radiance of someone who has learned to be authentic, to honor their humanity, to contribute from overflow rather than depletion. This light doesn't burn others with its intensity or blind them with its perfection. It simply illuminates the path for others to find their own authentic way of being. As you close your eyes tonight, or whenever you're listening to this, carry with you not the burden of changing everything at once, but the gentle recognition that your worth was never contingent on your exhaustion. Your value was never dependent on your sacrifice. Your lovability was never earned through your utility to others. The journey from compulsive productivity to conscious contribution. From chronic self-sacrifice to sustainable service, from external validation to internal satisfaction, is not a destination you arrive at, but a path you walk daily. Each choice to honor your humanity, to respect your limits, to choose authenticity over approval, is a step along this path. Your ancestors survived so that you could learn to thrive. Your struggles have taught you wisdom that can serve not just yourself but others who are caught in the same patterns. Your pain has the potential to become your greatest gift, not because suffering is noble, but because integrated suffering becomes compassion, and compassion is what the world needs most. Rest now if you can. Not because you've earned it through today's efforts, but because you deserve it simply by virtue of being alive. Let go of the need to justify your existence through tomorrow's productivity. Trust that your worth will be exactly the same when you wake up, regardless of what you accomplish or fail to accomplish. The hardest workers don't struggle the most because they're weak or because they're doing something wrong. They struggle because they're carrying weight that was never theirs to carry, solving problems that were never theirs to solve, earning love that was always freely available. The liberation comes not from working less, but from working with consciousness, contributing from choice rather than compulsion, and remembering that you are infinitely more than the sum of your productivity. Write in the comments if this resonated. With you, I choose to remember my inherent worth. Let's see how many souls are ready to step off the hamster wheel of earned value and into the freedom of unconditional self-acceptance. And tell me what you'd like to explore in the next video. The comments with the most engagement will likely become the next journey we take together into the depths of what it means to be human in a world that often forgets our humanity. Sweet dreams, fellow traveler. Your worth was never in question. Your value was never up for debate. Your lovability was never conditional. Rest in that truth and let everything else fall into place around the solid foundation of your inherent preciousness.